driving to my office, so I'm on the phone. That's why I don't have my camera on. But I did want to be here, so I could be here for the beginning of the meeting.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I'm gonna turn off my mic. I just wanted to let you know that I was here.
Okay.
Thank you.
He's with the ACOM.
Heyo.
Hello.
Hey, Danelle. How are you?
Unmute. Good morning. How are you?
Good. Good.
Good morning.
And good morning.
Good morning, it's Scott Holcomb. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, Scott.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Chair Shimoni, it is 10 a.m. and we do have 4 of our 5 board members present. And Mayor DC is going to be covering for Council Member 8, and he will be about 5 to 10 minutes late.
Okay, great. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. Very good. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is our Wednesday, June 16th Mountain Line Board meeting. And let the public and all know that the Board of Directors may choose to recess into executive session or go into executive session if we were to still choose to do so. With that, can we get roll call?
Yes, thank you, Chair Shimoni and members of the board. One moment. There we go. City of Flagstaff, Adam Shimoni.
Present.
Coconino County, Geronimo Vasquez.
Present.
Thank you. City of Flagstaff, Paul Deasy, we are expecting. NAU, Josh Mayer.
Present as an alternate to Dana Coley.
Thank you. CCC, Tony Williams.
Present.
And we have several staff members on the line and on Zoom, actually, and in the training room. We have our attorney, Scott Holcomb, with us. Scott?
Good morning, all.
And then we have a few members from AECOM for the Flagstaff in Motion item. Monica Hernandez, Robert Peskin, and Darren Lozano on the line at this time. And we are also expecting around 10:30 Stephen Ice from Northern Arizona Healthcare to join us. So back to you, Chairman. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Rhonda, and welcome everybody, and good morning. Good to see everybody and hear your voices. Let's move on to item 3, safety minutes with Sam Short.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mountain Lion's June safety minute regarding sharing the road. It is no secret that in our community, we have an abundance of bicycle traffic. With this increased bicycle traffic, it is very important that motor vehicle drivers use extreme caution and do all that we can to allow bicyclists the ability to use the road safely. The Arizona Department of Transportation statistics show that on average, Flagstaff has approximately 52 bicycle collisions every year. Statistics also show that almost half of these collisions occur on or within a mile of the campus of Northern Arizona University. Several other locations within Flagstaff that have high bicycle collision rates are the areas of Butler Avenue and Milton Road. Regardless of the location, here are some things we can do to make sure the roads are safe with the bicyclists. Keep at least 3 feet of space between you and a bicycle, much more if possible. Pass on the left. Wait to pass a bicyclist until the traffic lane next to you is clear. This means on a 2-lane highway, wait until the opposing lane is clear. On roads with more than 2 lanes, wait until the traffic lane on your left is clear before changing lanes. Be patient. You should only pass when it is safe, even if this means driving behind a cyclist for a little while. Always check your blind spots for cyclists. Always pay special attention at a crosswalk. Do not be a distracted driver. Put away anything that could distract your attention from where it needs to be, your surroundings. One of the most important areas to be aware of bicyclists is at intersections. Cyclists going straight or turning right will usually be on the right of a vehicle in an intersection. So it is extra important to look for them if you are turning right. Cyclists are also able to use the left turn lane at an intersection, so stay alert when the light changes. At the end of the day, it is all about sharing the road. Remember, bicyclists have as much right to the road as cars. Stay patient and be alert so everyone can go home safe. Thank you and welcome to the June board.
Oh, Sam, thank you for that. I really appreciate your comments, and you're correct. Intersections is where a lot of our collisions and incidents occur between pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. So thank you for that reminder. And given the recent tragedy on the 28th of May, I'd like to just have a quick moment of silence for the life lost of Joanna Wheaton and those involved in the collision with the tow truck. Thank you. All right. Moving down to agenda item 4, that's approval of our joint meeting minutes. Board members, I am welcoming a motion of approval.
I move to approve.
Thank you, Director Williams.
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Vasquez. We have a motion by Director Williams to approve with a second by Director Vasquez. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. That motion carries. Thank you. Item number 5 is a discussion on microtransit pilot in the Huntington and Industrial Corridor. Staff recommends that the Board of Directors review the public comments received to date and close the public comment period effective June 16th and approve the proposed microtransit pilot in the Huntington and Industrial Corridor. Estella.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Estella Hollander, Mobility Planner with Mountain Line. And today I'm going to provide an update on the microtransit pilot, review the comments we received during the public comment period, and seek board approval to close the public comment period and approve the microtransit pilot. So next slide, please, Rhonda. So first, a little bit of background so we're all on the same page. Mountain Line received a grant from CTAA, or the Community Transportation Association of America, to test out a mobility on-demand solution, which I'll go into more detail of what that term means in the next few slides. And this is one-time grant funding for both the planning and the implementation of a pilot. Next slide, please. And so the pilot will focus on reducing the geographic gap in the Huntington Industrial Corridor. So bringing better access to this area, which some of you may know, this is home to many human service agencies as well as clinics. The shelter is located here, the food bank as well. And although this area is a low density industrial area, which may not warrant fixed route bus, there is a need for mobility options to better serve this area since there is such a high concentration of social services in this area. So next slide, please. And so mobility on demand is essentially an umbrella term for transportation services that can be hailed in real time, meaning they can typically, a ride can be hailed either through an app on someone's phone or a call-in option as well. They're flexible, meaning they're not following a fixed route or a schedule, and they're utilizing emerging technologies. This is usually through private sector partnerships, which provide either the app or a driving app as well. And this is essentially another tool in the toolbox to provide transportation services. And so for this pilot, Mountain Line will be focusing and testing out microtransit, which will be utilizing our paratransit vehicles, which are pictured on the right-hand side, and essentially turning them into Ubers and Lyfts. So people can hail a ride and they would be picked up from a paratransit vehicle. And this will be open to the general public. Next slide, please. And so this is the proposed service area. So that area in the yellow rectangle, that is really the focus of this pilot and bringing access to the Huntington Industrial Corridor. So the area in the yellow, people can get picked up and dropped off anywhere within this area. And then the surrounding bus stops, which are circled in blue, someone could get picked up or dropped off at those areas. So for example, someone could get picked up at the Walmart and then dropped off at the shelter, for example. And so there may still be some minor changes as staff would like to review this proposed area with a software vendor, which we're in the process of getting someone on board, just to make sure that this area is productive and effective as possible. Next slide, please. And so there are a few program updates from when I presented in April. First are the hours of service. And so this pilot, this will run, the microtransit pilot will run Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then on the weekends and holidays as well. This does coincide with the peak periods for the human service agencies as well. And this at least provides a base level of service. This is just a pilot trying to understand demand. So we could always expand these hours if needed, if demand does exceed the times outside this period. And so fare will be $1 each way, and payment can be through cash. We will accept cash on board, but through the app as well. So if someone does have a smartphone and they're hailing the ride through their phone, they can connect to their credit or debit card if they have that, but we will have a cash option as well for those who may not have a credit card or debit card. And then procurement. So we released a request for proposals, an RFP, and received 9 responses, which is the most we've ever received on an RFP. And staff do have a recommendation of award that will be with Spare Labs. And we, however, we are not yet under contract, so still working through that process. But we will soon have a vendor on board, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. And so estimated operations budget, as mentioned in the beginning, this pilot will be utilizing grant funds that Mountain Line received. The budget for the grant funds is $300,000 that staff received. And so the first line here, the microtransit pilot, estimated that operations cost would be around $200,000. This is on the very high spectrum. This budget includes 1 dedicated vehicle, so 1 vehicle during those service hours, as well as additional vehicle during peak hours. However, I do want to mention that part of this pilot, we really want to utilize existing paratransit vehicles in the field. So ones that are already providing rides and are out there. So for example, if a paratransit vehicle drops someone off, there may be 30 minutes to an hour till their next pickup. So being able to actually switch the paratransit vehicle to an on-demand trip to provide some trips during that downtime. And so that will hopefully reduce some of the costs of the microtransit pilot, since it will reduce the need for dedicated vehicles, as well as improve the efficiency in our paratransit program as well. And just to show, for comparison's sake, the second line on this chart is estimated fixed route costs, and this is with comparable level of service. So microtransit, the wait times tend to be anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. And so the fixed route costs shown here has a frequency of 20 minutes, just to show kind of the cost differences if we were to provide fixed route to this area. So as you can see, it's more than double the estimated budget. And next slide, please. And so Mountain Line conducted a Title VI comment period, which basically provides opportunity for the community to voice any concerns or positive comments as well. And so the formal comment period was April 21st through today. And we advertised through a variety of opportunities. So we had flyers at the surrounding bus stops, did several social media posts through Facebook. We had a dedicated website page, as well as advertised through several community listservs just to advertise the public comment period. And so we received 5 positive comments total. So I listed a few on here, but essentially, yeah, love the idea, love the partnership with the shelter and the food kitchen. Great for seniors who may not qualify for paratransit, but get exhausted walking long distances. Love the innovation, as well as an excellent service to help reduce the social determinants of health. So in general, yeah, there was a lot of just positivity around this pilot from the community. And next slide, please. And so with that, that's the end of my presentation. We, again, are seeking board approval to close the public comment period, as well as approve the proposed microtransit pilot. And so with that, I'm open for any questions or comments.
Excellent, thank you. Directors, questions, comments? As you're thinking, I do have a question. Estella, do we know when the food kitchen provides their dinner and when people are typically leaving the food kitchen?
Yeah, so it starts at 4:30, and so they're still doing, I think, the pickup service where it's just to-go meals. And so, yeah, it starts at 4:30 till it ends around 6. So it is kind of right at that potential cutoff.
Okay, okay, I just want to make sure we're not missing that population. Other comments and questions? If not, if there's a motion, we could entertain that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Scott Holcomb. Because of the nature of the two motions, it'd probably be best to do a motion first to close the public comment period and then approve the proposed microplan of the pilot after closing the public comment period.
Thank you.
That was gonna be my question. If I could, I'll move to close the public comment period effective June 16th.
Thank you, Director Mayor. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. I think that's unanimous support that the comment period is closed. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the proposed micro transit pilot?
I motion to approve the micro transit pilot.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very good. Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, that motion carries, I believe. Yep, we're good. Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. For Rhonda, were you able to identify who voted which way?
I apologize. I accidentally said nay, but I already voted for yes. So I think that was just me. Apologize.
And which way is your vote? Yay or nay?
Yay.
Thank you.
We have a unanimous vote in support of the pilot. Thank you for that clarification. Great, that brings us down to item number 6, which is our proposed 2022 budget. Staff recommends the Board of Directors approve the FY 2022 proposed budget for a total expense budget of $39,409,945, operating of $9,984,966, and a capital of $29,424,978. Heather.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Directors. Lori Batiste is out of the office, so I'll be filling in on this item for her. So just as a reminder, we did review the workforce budget and strategies in April and the line-by-line budget in May. So today is just a quick wrap up and summary of that budget recommendation for your consideration and then approval. And I'm sorry, I hit something on my end. Next slide. So our workforce strategies do include competitive wages, the ASRS defined retirement benefit, health, dental, and vision insurance for all employees, and we cost share for dependent and family member coverage, life insurance, and then we offer a variety of retention programs, including a stay-on bonus for our CDL positions. Next slide. Additionally, we continue to fund in our 2022 budget education and training opportunities, Employee Assistance Program or EAP, a referral program again for our CDL position, and then we do assist our CDL operators, our new hires with training, permit fees, and physical, medical or physical cost. We offer a tool allowance for our facilities and fleet staff, and then we have a wellness program that is used by many of our employees. Next slide. Overall, our workforce budget on the screen, we have a 2% increase for our indirect wages and benefits and a 7% increase for our operations or direct salaries and benefits. As a reminder, this does include the pay plan. It will provide an average 3% increase for folks not on step tables. We do have 4 positions: operators, operations supervisors, operation coordinators, and our bus detailers that have a step table, and those positions average 4.5% increase year over year. Our total increase in wages overall was actually 5.9%. Next slide. And the pay plan is 4.5% of that overall change of 5.9%. Sorry about that. Next slide. brief review of the programs and how they've changed. Our bus program is proposed to increase by 8%, while our paratransit is proposed to decrease by 24%. And part of this is due to a restructuring. So we no longer have a paratransit operator and a bus operator. We have one operator that is shared amongst the two programs. This has also allowed us to streamline many of our supervisor and manager positions. And this has resulted in a shift in cost from paratransit to bus to help reflect some of those changes and also reduce some of our cost. Our planning overall increase is 46%, and this is moving some of our planning positions and benefits from capital project programs into our reoccurring operating, because that's really what those positions are. City taxi is fairly flat, as is county taxi. Our van pool program also fairly flat. And then we do have, we do get revenue in our general fund, but in 2022, we have no anticipated expenses. General fund typically receives revenues from the advertising program as well as your memberships. Next slide. So total operating increase of 5%. And when we look at the transit tax as one funding source within our overall operating budget, or operating and capital budget, the transit tax increase is sorry, my information on my slide is old, is about 7%, and this is due to some of the changes in our capital program. The City of Flagstaff does pay about 20% of our overall capital, although there are several programs like our passenger shelter program that the city funds 100%. Next slide. This is just to illustrate the capital programs in some major categories. We did carry over several fiscal year 2021 budget items into 2022. Those are now reflected in our 2021 projected column in the middle of this slide, and then in the 2022 budget on the far right. So for example, we had 2 buses and the NAU facility budgeted in 2021 under buses. That has been 1, reduced, and 2, moved into the 2022 budget. Another item is the DCC, which is in our facility cost. We've spent some, we've carried some over, and we've increased it based on the changes and where we'll be with that project. Next slide. And at the bottom line of what we do in our financial planning is our fund balance. This is really the City of Flagstaff Transit Tax Fund balance. This is where we will stand for the next 5 years if you adopt the 2022 budget. So that this is what will happen over the next 5 years if that budget remains unchanged in future years, except for the 2% that we use for our cost inflation factor. This does factor in replacement of buses. So as those buses reach their end of life, we will replace them with 20% match from the city. It does assume we will get 80% match from our federal sources. I want to point out this is a rather high fund balance. Mountain Line generally does not keep this high of a transit tax fund balance in our coffers. We try and expand services when we see this kind of fund balance. A couple of factors that we're using in our financial projection right now is we don't know how electrification is going to change our overall operating cost, and we're still trying to account for that. Additionally, we don't want to say we're going to make service changes until we have the outcome of the 5-year plan or Flagstaff in motion. And so right now we're illustrating a high fund balance because we need to account for those 2 options in our future. Next slide. So with that, that's a brief overview of the information that was better detailed in the April and May meetings. And again, as Director Shimoni said, we're asking for adoption of the fiscal year 2022 budget, total of $39,409,945. And our operating will be $9.9 million of that, and our capital $29 million of that total, as illustrated on the screen. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we're seeking a motion.
Thank you. Heather, were you able to get that number that we talked about?
Yes, I did. Thank you. For everyone on the phone, Director Shimoni and I spoke briefly before the meeting, and he did ask me to clarify what our marketing budget is. So within the 9.9 million, we do have roughly $10,000 for photo and video as part of our marketing program. $42,000 for our consultant, and an additional $35,000 in print support. So our total $88,000 of that 9.9 million is for marketing and marketing services.
Great. That's wonderful. Directors, any comments or questions? And if there isn't, we can entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the FY 2022 proposed budget as presented.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Director Mayer and a second by Director Vasquez to approve the fiscal year 2022 proposed budget. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay.
Aye.
Director Vasquez, were you in favor of the budget?
Yes, I said aye.
Okay, thank you. Any opposed say nay. That motion carries. Thank you. That brings us down to our next agenda item. Thank you, Heather. You know what? Are we ready to move on to NIH? Oh, perfect.
Yes,
Good.
please.
Wonderful. We're going to skip ahead since we have the team online from the Northern Arizona Healthcare Campus. We're going to skip ahead to agenda item number 9, which is service to the proposed Northern Arizona Healthcare Campus. And the board may provide direction, but there is no recommendation from staff at this time. Deputy General Manager Morley, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are joined by Steve Ice today with NIH if there are any questions that the board wants to direct that way. Kate Morley, Deputy General Manager at Mountain Line. And really just wanted to kick off an initial discussion with the board about the potential relocation of Northern Arizona Healthcare south of town towards the Fort Tuthill area. Next slide, Rhonda. So I'm sure many of you have heard by now or seen site plans for the proposed development by NIH. It is just north of Fort Tuthill, south of the Mountain Dell area. And it is both commercial research and development housing, in addition to a medical campus that would be there. And so medical campuses tend to be huge trip generators alone, but there's also additional employment centers and housing that would occur as well, which are also important for us to consider transit services too. I think it is important to note though that this is a phased development, which might change how service looks over time. Day one may not look like, year 20 down the road. It will be something that changes the shape of this part of town and therefore what services we need to be providing or thinking about providing in the future. And in talking with city staff, this is going to be a significant trip generator. I think they said it's the largest trip generator of a development that they've ever seen. And so in terms of people traveling to the site, it will be significant. Next slide. So just going back to the importance of serving this site with transit, the hospital itself is a vital service that does require access by all. And we know that about 30% of our residents don't have access to a vehicle, and we want to make sure that they do have access to the services that are down there. Additionally, we know we're trying to meet equity and climate goals set by both the city and that are reflected in Mountain Line's own strategic planning documents. As I mentioned, we expect the new site to be a large trip generator, but for reference, we're providing about 34,000 trips a year to the current hospital location. And we've identified about 100 unique users of the existing EcoPass program. That's the employer pass program that NIH does participate in. We do anticipate longer trips now for paratransit to access the new site, which can increase costs in that program, even without a fixed route service. And if there is no fixed route service, we would anticipate even higher paratransit costs because people can't choose to ride the bus instead. Therefore, the option to use paratransit would increase. We all know that's a very expensive program to run. And ultimately, we want to recognize that if this issue of transit isn't addressed up front in the development process, that it will become a Mountain Line problem farther down the road. And I would say that would be a political problem in terms of the community's expectation for us to serve them. We've seen this in other developments when the shelter moved off of the existing bus routes. We continue to have conversations about how to serve the shelter. I would say the same for the Sacred Peaks Health Center site moving out on 89. We know that since that development has occurred, it's been an ongoing conversation about how to provide safer and better access. And so we really want to make sure that the transit issue is addressed up front in the development plans. We all know how we're going to proceed before the project moves forward. Next slide. So what might service look like? I have a very rough map of what a route directly to NIH might look like. Some of these roads don't exist yet, so I will say it is very rough. But we recommend 20-minute service. That's a little bit less than the current site is served with. They have a 20-minute route and an hourly route, so we're getting slightly better service. But we've talked a lot about frequency with this board and how that really opens the door to people using transit. When things become 30 minutes or 60 minutes, they become very difficult to use and impact people's lives, especially a 60-minute route. So 20 minutes is our recommendation as the minimum. Depending on how things grow over time, it may be something we wanted to see served at a higher level, but that feels like a good starting point at least. We have mapped out this route in front of you just directly to the hospital. We estimate it's about a 45-minute trip, and that takes 3 buses to run into 20-minute service. So there might be opportunity to extend some other places with those 3 buses and get a little bit more in. I have mapped out a route to the airport. It is really tight. It comes in right at about 60 minutes. Again, I'm playing with roads that don't exist, so it's hard to be very accurate on that, but that might be a little bit too tight to get there, but it's definitely something we could explore. Fort Tutt Hill is immediately adjacent. That I'm confident we could get in without adding additional buses and keeping the 20-minute service. But I do think there are creative things we can do, and we'll work with the city to keep refining those travel time estimates so that way we can we want to do this as efficiently as possible and put the fewest number of buses into service we would need to provide the best frequency that we could. If we are able to do this with the 3 buses that we anticipate, that's approximately $1.5 million a year. Our estimate is that it costs us about $500,000 to run every bus. Plus there are some capital needs for new buses. Those are things we're better at getting grants at. They're not as high of a concern on my radar as the operating costs are, but they are a consideration. And then of course, paratransit costs are separate from the cost of adding a fixed route bus to service. Next slide. So next steps, we're really trying to work with the city to confirm those runtime predictions, because that's ultimately going to drive what the frequency and the cost of services. So trying to get that as accurate as we can. Again, everybody's modeling, trying to figure out what this will look like in the future. We'll then work to refine cost estimates. Right now, we're just using that approximate per bus. But once we have really good routes with travel times in place, we can get very specific and try to get creative about how to bring some of those costs down. We also believe that there's opportunity to initiate conversations potentially with the county and airport if there's interest from those groups, because there might be some of those opportunities to extend the route without adding new buses. And if those play out, the opportunity to negotiate with the county or airport and NIH about who will pay for service and what that will look like. Our end goal as staff is we want to identify how transit is being provided and who is paying for it prior to the approval process, and to have the agreement outlined in the development agreement. We've had other circumstances in the past where we've had handshake agreements with developers, were not included in development agreements, and after they have all the approvals in place, the agreements fall apart. And so we are looking for something that could stick and that everyone's agreed upon how this will work. Next slide. So with that, I just really wanted to open up discussion, see if there were questions, provide the board the opportunity to speak with Steve if that's desired, and make sure it was on everybody's radar. So with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Kate, and hi, Mr. Ice. Welcome welcome to our meeting. Thanks for joining us. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation now and not later. This is really important. I did see a hand go up. Oh, Director Mayer, go ahead.
Thanks, Kate, for that presentation. I do have a question for Mr. Ice. So, as Kate mentioned, knowing that this is obviously going to be a phased development, can you speak to where the development happens, the timeline that the development happens in terms of where the larger trip generating pieces of the development will occur?
Yeah, I can. Thank you for having me, by the way. I think from a trip generation standpoint, obviously the hospital itself and the associated ambulatory care center. So from a scope perspective, we're anticipating about a 820,000 square foot healthcare development. And that's about 650,000 square feet of inpatient hospital and 170,000 square feet of outpatient ambulatory care. I feel that's going to be the largest trip generator for us, obviously from an employee perspective and from the community trying to reach us from a healthcare perspective. From a timeline standpoint, we are anticipating an opening of the ambulatory care center, which is the outpatient portion. So doctor's offices, outpatient surgery, imaging in early 24, with a hospital opening in more like mid 26. We haven't formalized the timelines of the development around the hospital. I think we need to get through this planning and zoning exercise, as well as kind of finalize what our scope and schedule is before we really start discussing development. If you can imagine, most developers aren't interested in talking to us until we kind of settle on that piece of it. But I do think some of the other phases of development that will come on the heels of the hospital would be the retail, restaurant, residential component of the development. And then I think it's more in the further out years, as Kate had mentioned, even into the 10 and 20 year out years for the research and development component, which is down on the south side, which is probably more of an employee-based trip generation for employees of the companies that would be there. And then I think, into the late into this decade, early into next decade, we'd be talking about some of the clinical partnership components, complementary healthcare pieces after our healthcare was up and standing.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for that question and that response. Other questions? So I'll ask, or Director Vasquez, go ahead.
So I was just going to ask, what's the hospital's kind of vision of public transit for them, based on the feedback that you received from us, from the county at our county meeting, and based on the other outreach that's been done? What's the hospital's vision of what public transit will look like to this new space?
I guess I wouldn't say we have a vision where we're looking to work and team with you on that vision as the experts in understanding it. So I think we understand that it's vital to the success of our development to have adequate public transportation to us. So that is part of the reason that we reached out to Mountain Lion and to folks from the county as early as we did in the process, because we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of everyone prior to this development agreement. I think from our perspective, we just want to make sure that it's looked at in a fair practice, and that we know there's other big trip generators around us, like the county park, the existing airport, the development that's happening next to the airport through Gentera. So I think in my mind, the most effective and efficient way to do it is to have us start discussions amongst all the entities that this bus line would serve. I think we would be doing a disservice to that area if we just were talking about bus service just to our new hospital, since there's so many users in that area of Flagstaff that could use public transportation. So we're more than happy to be part of those combined discussions of what that looks like.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I continue to ask that only because I know you as you're going through this process, a vision is being shaped, and hopefully, it continues to be as collaborative as it's been. And I think we can really create something special for public transit in that section of Flagstaff. So thank you. And I appreciate the efforts and the outreach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Vasquez. Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and say I agree with you, Mr. Rice. I think that this would be a huge service to that region for for Tut Hill and also for the airport. I do see the hospital being a major driver of the ridership that's going to be servicing that route. But I think that there is room for collaboration and partnership. And so, yeah, I appreciate your comments and your willingness to incorporate public transportation as part of your plans in the initial phases rather than trying to retrofit it later. So with the DA, what are your thoughts in terms of how do we best set ourselves up for success with your efforts?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Now, like I said, I think, I know, I believe at least the developers from Gentera who are doing that work next to the airport have already been in discussion with Mountain Lion and the city. So I think at this point, now knowing, and with us putting our formal application in, that joint meetings between ourselves, the county, from a parks perspective, the airport, and the Gentera development are the best path forward to us making sure we meet the needs of the entire area.
Okay, thank you for that. I can't help but think, as you all continue, this might help force the conversation on ADOT to address Milton and figure out how to improve that corridor. That's a whole nother can of worms that we're not going to go into, but I can see there just being a lot of traffic going towards the hospital now from town. And I just see that this relationship and this partnership with Mountain Lion being such a crucial component to getting people out of their cars and utilizing public transportation, reducing vehicle miles traveled.
And I think Kate touched on it a little bit in her discussion, but I think it's also a worthwhile exercise to look at what the relief on public transportation is going to be with the hospital no longer being downtown, and seeing if operational funds could be moved around in some capacity to facilitate some of the new transit we need to the southeast part of town.
Sure. So this might be a question for you, Kate, or Heather. What would you say are the next steps?
Yeah, I think I agree with Steve. I think a meeting with anyone who's potential partners, I see as needing to refine with the city, and I'm going to meet with them on Friday morning to really try to nail down what these travel times might be and how many buses it would take for a slew of options just to NAH, all the way to the airport, to the Gentera site, a couple different routing options. And then I think a meeting of any of the interested parties. I think historically, we've been a little hesitant to be the one leading or to be pushing people to partner with us. We're very interested in serving people who want our services. So, for example, with the airport, it would, I'd be curious if the airport is interested. Mountain Lion doesn't necessarily want to be the one pushing for that if there is no interest from the city. If there is interest from the city, we'd love to be giving the data and facts about how much things cost, what we see service looking like. I think I've heard you, Mr. Chair, indicate there is interest from the airport, and being a city representative, I think we could, if that's true, I think we could initiate some of those conversations, saying that we've heard from you as a council rep that is of interest, rather than staff trying to push partnerships.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Is Mayor Dezia on the call yet by the chance?
Yes, I am. I was actually just about to chime in. I am also in support of getting public transit to the airport. I think it only makes sense, especially as we look to JW Powell's, we look to the Gentera development. by the airport. It's just, this is definitely good to be proactive with, but I am in support of getting public transit out that direction. So.
Great. And thank you, Mayor Deasy. Thank you for joining us and stepping in for Director Sweet. Yeah, I agree. I'd be curious to see how this all plays out, you know, just given that the airport has, you know, somewhat infrequent needs in terms of their ridership. I can imagine that being somewhat infrequent versus the NAH would probably likely need more of a regular, you know, frequency for your population. But that sounds good to me. Is there any ideas in terms of when this might be able to come back to the board for an update?
Yeah, I definitely, with having a July recess, I would like to be able to come back for the August meeting with an update on discussions that we've had, interest from other partners, what routing options everybody's leaning towards making sense. I know NAH has an aggressive timeline for their CUP. We definitely don't want to be the holdup to that. We want to be meeting their needs. So, or it's not a CUP, it's a plan amendment, I believe. So we will, you know, we'll try to act quickly so that way we're meeting deadlines for them.
That's great. And then from the county, from Supervisor Vasquez, is there anything that we want the county to be working on in terms of potentially being a financial partner in this?
We can have those discussions and see what this looks like long term, especially as the package that the hospital considers and would like to see. We can see for where areas are for collaboration and mutual support.
That's great. Thank you. Very good. Okay, anything else you think we should cover on this agenda item?
No, that sounds great. I think we have some clear next steps, and I will work with Steve to get a meeting of partners set up.
Mr. Rice, thank you so much for taking the time to be here in front of us and to prioritize public transportation as part of your plans. It means a lot to this board and to this agency and to the community. So we really appreciate that, because as Kate mentioned, often we're a second, you know, thought later on versus integrated into the plan. So we really appreciate you prioritizing this in your plans.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And Kate, yeah, feel free to reach out. We have our whole team assembled from a design and engineering perspective, so we can support in multiple capacities.
Very good. Great. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back to item number 7 on our agenda, which is our COVID-19 reopening plan. This staff recommends the board of directors adopt revisions to the COVID-19 reopening plan, and Deputy General Manager Morley is going to present.
Thank you, and thank you, Rhonda, for navigating slides for us. So last fall, the board adopted a COVID-19 reopening plan based on best information at the time, as well as input from partners like the county's health services division and City of Flagstaff's reopening plan. Next slide. So a lot of things have changed since we did that last fall. There are vaccines, and we know that we have a significant number of employees who are vaccinated. We also know more about how it's spread in terms of contact, physical contact versus airborne spread. Additionally, since we did our reopening plan, the federal government has instituted a mask mandate on public transit, and the city and county have both modified their guiding documents. And so we really feel like it's time to come back and update ours to reflect this new information. Next slide. So we very much want to simplify. We are in phase 3 along with the City of Flagstaff, and our plan proposes to move to phase 4, which is essentially end of the pandemic when the city does that. But being that the city is currently in phase 3, and so are we'd like to just modernize that section of the plan. So older phase 1 and phase 2, we haven't made revisions to, but phase 3, we're proposing to allow limited travel for staff. We are seeing our conferences go back to in-person, especially planning for the winter or coming into next spring. So we'd like to be able to attend some of those professional development opportunities again. We also want to allow professional visitors into our offices. We have been pretty restrictive on having outsiders attend. We have health screenings, all those other pieces, but we want to essentially open the door to doing business with our partners again, having trainings for other transit agencies, et cetera, so long as we're following other rules that are in place. The plan currently also suggests that we're encouraging staff to work from home, and we'd really like to flip that and encourage staff to come back to the office, especially, and then we do have a telework policy that people could take advantage of, but we'd rather rely on that at this stage than encouraging people to work from home for COVID. That also allows us to do some things like we've been offering phone stipends and other IT supportive measures for staff who we've required to work from home. It would allow us to reduce some of those costs again by inviting staff back and not covering those individual services. We also, the board, the decision-making on the mask mandate is currently in the hands of the board. It was a board adoption action. We're proposing to take that from the board and give it to the federal government now. So we are interested in hearing from you if that's something you would like to turn over. If TSA and FTA and the CDC all remove their mask mandates on transit, is that also when the board would like to remove our mask mandate, or are they still in, are you still interested in having that authority? And then finally, we talk a lot about the sanitizing that we're doing on the buses, along with health screenings and occupancy requirements. And we'd really like to provide more flexibility on all of those so that we were just following the latest practices and not having such stringent requirements. So it does provide quite a bit of flexibility. It does keep us in phase 3. We would still be under the mask mandate that exists. And we would still have occupancy requirements, but some of the extensive sanitizing we're doing would be reduced. We would still keep some. We think that we have learned good lessons from COVID that may always stay in place. We like the sanitizing of the buses at night. We intend to keep some of the additional cleaning staff that we've brought on board, but we'd like to do that just per what we think are best practices long-term, not necessarily enhanced for COVID. So with that, I'm very interested in hearing what the board has to say on some of these recommendations.
Thank you, Kate. Board members, what are your thoughts about these revisions? Dr. Mayer, you want to jump in? Start us off?
Sure, why not? Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I wanted to talk through specifically the removing the masking decision from the board of directors in place with the federal masking requirements. I'm a big fan of local control, and what's happening nationally can be different from what's happening, in our service area. So sort of in favor of keeping that within the control of the board of directors, of course, following broad guidance, hopefully, in alignment with, some of our existing partners. There's the dynamics that are happening, even in Phoenix are different than what's happening here. And it goes for both ways, right? If the CDC says, masks are no longer required, of course, the board of directors can say, well, here masks are going to be required still, and vice versa. Now, in terms of returning to staff to offices, again, I think I think that management can be empowered to make those decisions, and based on what the data is telling us. I know a lot of the partners have brought staff back, in different capacities. Of course, it's not like a light switch, but sort of a phased in approach. Like Kate said, I think that COVID has taught us a lot, and maybe the work environment can be changed forever in terms of flexibility and work from home agreements and what have you. So I'm in favor of returning back to what may be more normal, maybe not normal yet, but maybe more normal. And so those are sort of my broad thoughts on the topic.
Thank you for that, Director Mayer. I appreciate that a lot, and I agree with you. I'd like to hear from each of the directors on this. Director Williams, do you want to jump in and share some thoughts?
Sure. I think the proposed revisions here are very reasonable. They're very similar to many of the ones that we've implemented here at Coconino Community College. We have all of our staff returning to campus on July 1st, on or before July 1st, actually. And so what was presented here seems to be kind of aligned with many of the things that we've been working through in our own organization, and don't seem to be out of the ordinary. I do agree with Director Mayer's comments about the decision, the masking decision to be retained with the board of directors for many of the reasons that he proposed. Although I do think it's helpful to sort of align ourselves with some standards, if you will, that come from recommendations from like the CDC or what the other federal transportation organizations are adhering to as perhaps best practice. I think that's a good way to measure our decision making against. And definitely, I find the comments in support of the flexibility of continuing sanitizing and the things I think all organizations have discovered some benefits from COVID, as inconvenient and difficult as it might have been to get through. It's made us rethink kind of our business practices and how we're taking care of our environments, and in this case, our buses. And I think our ridership would probably be really appreciative of knowing that the buses are a little cleaner, even after COVID. So those are my comments.
Thank you for that. Kate, quick question on that topic of masking. I know that we have some requirements that, mandates that we have to follow because we're federal. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So if the board wanted to retain the masking decision, we would still have to keep masks on as long as the federal mask mandate on transit is in place. And it is currently in place. They're allowing flexibility in the enforcement of it in outdoor areas, but not on buses and not within indoor transfer facilities or hubs, et cetera. So we definitely have to keep masks on until that's removed. If the board wanted to retain decision-making authority, we would also keep masks on until essentially the board decided to lift it on their own. But the board couldn't choose to lift it prior to the federal mandate being lifted, if that makes sense. And I see Heather may want to add on.
Yeah, I would just like to clarify that as it stands in our community right now, I believe both the city and the county have lifted their masking requirements. And in fact, the governor did what he did several months ago, saying that we can't even have masking requirements under local jurisdiction. So what we're trying to do now is align where we're at as a company with some of those other decisions that have been made by our public bodies. And Kate's right, as long as we are considered public transit, we have to follow this federal mandate that covers all forms of transportation. So we are simply trying to align when we can lift the mask mandate with that lifting of the federal mandate, because our community partners have already done so, versus, as Kate just indicated, if we don't make this action now, potentially the mandate's lifted, say end of July, we can't lift that until we come back to the board in August. And that was our concern, is there's no local mandate at this point. We're relying on the federal mandate. And if that's lifted, then I just think it becomes very confusing and introduces a lot of conflict for our bus specifically and our bus riders if we're still under a mask mandate when the rest of the community is not.
So quick question, and I see you, Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna go to you in a second. So let's say the board of directors today said, okay, we're gonna say we're happy to remove the mask mandate as soon as the federal mandate requirements are lifted. You know, unless conditions change, the board could change that and say, no, actually, we're going to continue to require, or we're going to start requiring. We could do that at a later date, right?
We can, and one maybe a way to work around, I think what I hear the concerns is, maybe the mask mandate is not changed under phase 3. Maybe it's that under phase 4, the board's mask mandate is automatically lifted. And so that instead of changing phase 3, we change phase 4, which is really the declaration that the pandemic's over. Or when the city determines they move to phase 4. And so again, that aligns transit with the city and really handles our concern of the time of potentially having to come back to the board with the July recess. Just from a timing perspective, that's one of the concerns we were attempting to address. So maybe that's the workaround that addresses Director Mayer's concern of local control versus federal control. I agree. We still want the local control. We're just trying to align what we're doing with decisions that have already been made in our community and to, if you will, fix this board directive that we can't lift it until it comes back to the board.
Thank you. Director Mayer, you want to respond?
So that's helpful. I think, you know, that my concern, you know, Heather spoke to it perfectly, and that it really the concern of alignment. You know, I think that, you know, the more aligned we can be with, you know, what our local partners are doing, the better. And if we can, you know, build in some flexibility into that plan, you know, that's really my broader concern.
Thank you. Dr. Vasquez, would you like to weigh in on these revisions?
Sure. So first off, I appreciate the revisions, and I think that kind of as mentioned before is that a lot of the different partners in the community are already going in the direction of removing the mask. And I appreciate following the federal guidelines. And I also appreciate the fact that we're about to go on a recess and things might change in the process. And so I really liked that idea of having of modifying stage 4. So that way it's kind of in place that when the federal guidelines change, it automatically changes for the bus line. So that way there's not that fear of having to be misaligned for a month or so during this process. So I agree we should follow best practices and maintain that local control, but with that federal guidance. And I like the fact that modifying stage 4 is a way that you can do that kind of like builds in that transition if needed. So I'm I'm in agreement with the proposed revisions.
Thank you. And Director Deasy, what are your thoughts on these revisions?
I am in support. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Any further dialogue on this topic? I think we've covered a lot of ground. Director Williams, do you have anything else to add?
No, I do not.
Great. Any comments, directors? Anything else? I think I too am aligned with what the group has shared. Kate, do you feel like you have direction?
I have good direction. I think if Rhonda goes to the next slide, the plan was actually adopted. Oh, sorry, I have that. You can go one more slide. I think we covered all this. The plan was originally adopted by the board, and so we are looking for you to officially modify them with a motion. So maybe I think you could amend the motion in front of you to also say moving the authority of the board to require masks to phase 4. I'm not coming up with great language at the moment.
Mr. Chairman, this is Scott Holcomb. Yeah, I think it would be helpful. You can have the motion to adopt the amendments to the reopening plan as presented, including that the mask mandate on the buses would terminate at the same time that the federal mandate terminates. I think I think that would clarify. Kate, does that work?
No, they want to retain control until we move to phase 4. So I think somehow stating that the authority of the board remains until phase 4.
I also stand corrected.
So, Chair Shimoni, I would make and amend the recommendation to the staff that we recommend the Board of Directors adopt revisions to the COVID-19 reopening plan as presented, with the exception of the mask mandate, moving the lifting of that mask mandate to phase 4 or at the direction of the Board of Directors.
Okay,
So then the
I'm-
mandate would only lift if we go to phase 4 or we come back to the board, whichever comes first.
Okay, so I'm going to make that motion. Is there do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. Any further discussion? Dr. Mary, you good? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That motion carries. Thank you very much. Good discussion. Thank you, directors, and thank you, staff. Okay, that brings us down to item number 8 on our agenda, which is the fiscal year 2022 task orders of the AECOM Technical Services. Staff recommends the Board of Directors authorize the CEO and General Manager to redistribute prior approved task order valuations as fiscal year 2022 carry forward in value of $860,456 for AECOM Technical Services Incorporated contract.
Thank you. Next slide. I believe the figures in your staff, I see the slide does not match your staff report. I forgot to update the slide. Your staff report is correct. This is something we usually do under consent agenda. However, we wanted to point out that one of the task orders under the AECOM contract is project management services and technical services related to the implementation of transit signal priority under the CASFAR intersection. And so, and that project, if you've read further down your staff reports yet, under the delegation of authority, you'll see came in far over construction budget. And so we are not recommending continuing to pursue that project. It was a grant funded project, and therefore it's modified some of the approval numbers in the staff report. And we just wanted to point that out because that's a little bit atypical. The numbers in the staff report now are correct. I apologize for not updating the slide in front of you though. So yes, okay. I think that's really it. If there's any questions, the AECOM task order is a general consulting services contract we entered into, I believe in 2017. This is the last year that we're able to extend that contract. We're not issuing any new task orders. It is really just carrying forward the remaining projects that they had been assigned under that.
Very good. Directors, any comments or questions? I think this is pretty straightforward. Do we need a motion? Yes, we do. Okay, directors, do we have a motion?
I will say, I think it could be as simple as approve the AECOM 2022 task orders.
I motion that we approve the AECOM 2022 task force.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, I'll take the second from Director Mayer, who came in seconds before you. NAU in the lead. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. That motion carries. Thank you. Very good. That takes us down to item number 10, which is our Flagstaff and Motion Services priorities. And the board may provide direction, but there is no recommendation from staff at this time. Busy.
Yes, thank you, Chair Shimoni. So first I want to thank the board for their valuable feedback and discussion at the May meeting. And Rhonda, next slide, please. Today, I am joined by Darren Lozano and Monica Hernandez and Robert Peskin from AECOM. They're our consultants for the Flagstaff in Motion Community Transit Plan. And we will present 3 topics and have a few questions for the board of directors to guide scenario development. We do welcome questions and comments throughout the presentation. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Darren.
Thank you, Busy. Thank you, Chair Tramoni, members of the board. Really what we wanted today was to kind of further the conversation that we had last month. I know we touched on several items and we briefly touched on the goals. What we wanted to talk through today was to assure the board, knowing that so much work has been done in the board development as part of the 2017 plan, that those aren't lost in the planning process that we're going forward with. And really the overview of this slide is to kind of show the process that we're going to go through by the development of these goals that we want to make sure they're measurable, establish relative objectives related to each goal, and then make sure that we develop quantitative metrics through the key performance indicator process. Next slide, please. And of course, as we're just starting with this process, what I'm going to share on the forthcoming slides are kind of samples of what you're to see as we go through this process. Here is a listing of some of those measurable metrics, for lack of a better term, some of the KPIs that will be developed going back to the original goals. I won't go through them all now, but I'm sure you're very familiar with as the transit service is developed. These are the metrics that we typically stand by to show how the service is performing. And so these will be related back to those various goals. Next slide, please. At last month's meeting, as part of the information, Busy shared a poll showing the 2017 goals and asking the board and TAC members to rank them. And just real briefly, the way they came out in the ranking, the top 3 were basically to target areas with the highest ridership potential, support transit-dependent populations, and to ensure that there's pedestrian and bicycle improvements and access to transit as part of the plan. So what we're going to do as part of our goal development is embed those factors and others into the different goals. And what I wanted to share is what is going to go to the public here. In working with the Mountain Line team, we developed these goals because we're definitely not starting from scratch. The Flagstaff community has been asked quite often, actually, over the last several years to provide input on transit and transit services, whether it was through the blueprint, I think Blueprint 2040 plan, the carbon neutrality plan, the 2017 plan. And so we developed these goals to solicit a reaction as we present to the public. So the first one stems really on rider experience. So continue to improve the quality and some of these sample objectives that we can tie back to the rider experience relate to that transit ridership. Again, one of those key factors from the 2017 plan, along with service reliability and customer satisfaction. Next slide, please. And one thing, as I'm going through this, kind of think in your mind, to make sure that it seems like we're capturing everything through our high-level one-word catchphrase there. And if there's anything that we should be considering as we go forward with the plan. The next 2 goals are really interrelated, accessibility and mobility. But one of the things that we thought about is when we talk about accessibility, we want to make sure that we definitely incorporate equity as we develop this goal. Look to provide services that provide access to residents, to new jobs. And the ways that you can do that is looking at ways to increase the span of transit services and connect those first mile connections. I know Estella talked about the microtransit projects, and so microtransit is certainly one of those transit modes we're going to consider as part of this plan. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, mobility really closely tied to accessibility. But again, this gets again to the equity factor. So looking how do we increase the number of transit-dependent residents, the access, and then also looking to improve accessibility at transit facilities. One of the questions might be on that second sub-bullet point is, well, how do you do that? And that might not necessarily be tied to specifically to the transit service. But one thing that I've been involved in the past is doing a kind of an inventory of the ADA accessibility to physical bus stops. So if that's something that could be or should be considered as part of that plan, that could, again, could be a sample objective related to this goal. Next goal, please. I won't touch a lot on this one, but sustainability, of course, is at the forefront of the Flagstaff community, specifically with the carbon neutrality plan. If you recall, Dr. Fred Solid presented his input from the focus groups at last month's presentation. And certainly his message that he heard from residents was to go big and to consider community factors at this time. And of course, sustainability and climate action was one of those issues. And so again, something that we really wanted to include as part of our overall goal process. Next slide, please. Investment's another one. That's one of the goals that we wanted to target, specifically related to the land use planning policies and economic development. One thing that we've heard over the last several months now is connection to the new hospital, which of course we talked about today. And that's certainly one of those priorities that we're going to assess as part of our transit plan going forward. Next slide, please. And finally, and this is a hot topic again that Dr. Fred Solid presented at last month's presentation, is the living affordability. Housing certainly came up as a major issue as part of his focus group analysis. And so really, how do we tie that into the overall Flagstaff in Motion plan? And again, we've listed a couple of just high-level sample objectives that we want to make sure resonate with the community, and at the same time developing those key performance indicators going back to those objectives. Next slide, please. And of course, I want to be mindful of time busy. I don't know if now's an appropriate time to take questions, but I know it's a lot of information.
Yep, we're good until 11:30. Thanks, Darren, for checking in.
Sure, no problem. I'm happy to go back to any of the goals and objectives, or if there's any further conversation based on last month or what was presented here, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Lozano, for that presentation. Director, comments and questions? You know, I was thinking it was really interesting last month how all of us basically said that we wouldn't typically ride the bus if we had to wait more than, I want to say it was like 8 or 15 minutes. And yet we ask our community to wait to utilize our buses. So I think there's just room for growth, and obviously that growth costs money, but I just find that interesting. Yeah, directors, any thoughts or comments or questions?
Sure. I'll go ahead and go. I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you. Thank you to the team for developing and looking at what are kind of the areas that we want to prioritize based on the feedback that was received. And so I really appreciate that. That's a tough one. You know, are you asking what's number one out of all those? Is that kind of the question, the primary goal? You know, and as we're thinking through that, what does that look like? To me, that's sustainability. How do we create something and maintain it so that we can continue to provide quality service to the community? And all those other aspects, I think if we create a sustainable system that uses those other priorities in there, I think we'll have a pretty cool public transit system for our area, you know? So I really appreciate the presentation and appreciate the thought that went through it to develop those priorities and whatnot. And like I said, for me, it's sustainability, but I see the value in each one of those. And I think that if we're going to create something sustainable, we have to address each one of those in kind and make it that quality programming that we're looking to create. So thank you.
Mr. Peskins, did you want to add anything?
Well, I'm on the next slide.
Okay.
Presentation.
Other directors, are we looking to get feedback on this slide, Lozano?
Sure, Chair Shimoni, members of the board. I think the information we just received from Board Member Vasquez is kind of what we're looking for. Of course, there are going to be trade-offs with each of these individual goals. So as we get into the actual key performance indicators, you know, items will shift based on priorities. And of course, it's input from the board, and we're going to have a very extensive community outreach effort. And so tying in those comments as well. So comments, again, similar to what we had just heard from Board Member Vasquez is what we're appreciating at this time.
Great, thank you. Director Mayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. just my thoughts on this slide in particular is that, when we look at priorities, there's sustainability goals that ought to be built in with any transit system, taking cars off the road and what have you. And I think that some of that just ought to be just naturally baked in. And so, of course that should be a priority because it's just inherent in a transit system. But I know, it's coming from the discussion that we had previously, the rider experience is going to be key in terms of wait times and things like that. If it's going to be usable, it's got to be user friendly, right? It's got to pay a lot of attention to time and consideration for first mile, last mile, and that kind of thing. So those are my thoughts on it. But of course, sustainability being sort of just baked into the pie.
Thank you, Director. And I'll just weigh in and say I agree too. I think that it needs to be accessible, meaning like, reliable, frequent, and that rider experience needs to be really, really at the heart, I would say. Director Williams, do you want to jump in?
I would echo much of what the other directors have shared. But as I reflect on our discussion last month and then what was presented here today, I can't help but not remember about how we were sort of fixated on how little time we would tolerate for waiting. And that aha moment sort of really drives for me more to the rider experience and recognizing that we serve a diverse population of riders. I think about somebody who might have an ADA compliance challenge to overcome and the extra time it takes to wait to get a ride. I feel rather privileged that I get to drive my own vehicle, and at a whim, I can just go and do whatever I want whenever. But I also know that I have students here at the college, and I know that there are others in our community that are solely dependent on public transportation to get around. And that rider experience is, I think, ideally the key to achieving a lot of the other needs, including sustainability. If that rider experience isn't convenient and frequent and easy to access, then people will choose to do something different. So it's really hard to pick because a lot of all of these on this list are all interrelated. They're all connected in some way. Which of them is the most likely to impact all the rest? But I just know that we live in a society that doesn't have a lot of patience, and that rider experience, that time is a big factor, I think, in whether people would choose to use public transportation over driving their own car.
That's a really good point, Director. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. A lot of us have the choice, and so we might not choose to wait, but there's a lot of the population that don't have that choice, and we got to keep them in mind, of course, as well. I didn't mean to cut you off, though. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Great. And then Director Deasy, I don't believe you were with us last month, but do you have comments on this topic after watching today's presentation?
Thank you. Yeah, I was not on the call a month ago. I would probably be echoing a lot of what the other directors have stated, particularly with Supervisor Vasquez regarding sustainability. But yeah, it's hard to prioritize. All of these are integral part of the whole situation. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide then.
So we've had the opportunity in talking with the stakeholders to begin to identify a range of potential funding sources to the extent that the solutions that we've been talking about today will result in a requirement for additional funding. These sources represent both the input from the stakeholders, reflect sources that are used elsewhere in Arizona, and reflect pertinent national experience. It's a pretty broad range of potential sources to choose from, ranging from relatively broad-based taxes like the current transit tax in Flagstaff to sources that look at fair pricing, particularly with some of our major markets, other transportation-related sources, and some other ideas as well. In the next slide, we talk about the process that we'll be going through. We can go to the next slide, where we begin with an examination of all of these sources, begin to quantify them. We have begun that process based on the feedback that we've received so far, and the 5 that we've been able to quantify so far in terms of the size of the tax base is the existing transit sales tax, a potential property tax in the city of Flagstaff, a potential increase to the existing bed, board, and booze, the BBB tax, a potential increase to the vehicle license tax that the county imposes, and a tax on the retail sales for marijuana. That last one surprisingly came up as an interesting idea with the stakeholders. It's way too soon to have a definitive number about what the sales are, but just based on population in Flagstaff and retail sales per capita in Boulder, Colorado, and Colorado is sort of leading the nation in terms of the implementation of this new funding source. We have some numbers. So we have 5 potential sources. We're going to quantify the cost for the potential new transit services. And then we have a sketch planning model where we'll quickly look at alternative levels of reliance on the 5 sources that I just talked about, plus some of the other sources on the list from the prior slide. And that's a summary of where we are on the funding.
Okay. Can someone remind me, Prop 421 from 2018 that barely didn't get passed. Can someone remind me the partnership agreement with NAU? I believe there was some level of partnership, right?
Yes, this is Busy, and I welcome Kate to jump in. I wasn't here at that time, but as I understand it, it was if that measure passed, NAU would contribute, I believe, $1 million annually. Kate, if you could just confirm or.
I see head nods.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you for this update on the slide, Mr. Peskin. Personally, I do see what Supervisor Vasquez and DC mentioned, along with what our consultant Fred Sala brought to us last month, being a crucial component of this moving forward in terms of tying this to sustainability. And I think that, you know, at least in my mind, directors, I can see this going back out to a ballot initiative at some point. I want to remind the group that in 2018, when this was on the ballot, there were 2 other ballot measures from Mountain Line on the ballot. Or I'm sorry, I don't believe that's correct. One was the transportation tax, 419, and then 420 was the bridge. And then 421 was the frequencies that we just talked about. I can see that, I can imagine if we put it back on there and tied it to sustainability, I think that would pass. And I know sustainability is considering a ballot initiative at some point, potentially in the next few years. So I do wonder if there's room for collaboration there. If Director Deasy has any thoughts on that, I'd be curious, just since we're both representing the city. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, sorry, I'm on my phone here. I wanted to mention a few things about the funding. So yeah, we are looking into a potential green bond that this might be able to be tied into. I do want to mention when we're discussing the BBB tax that is probably not an option, mainly because of what passed at the state level in just last year. Was it Prop 206 that prevents a service tax? We're grandfathered into it right now with the BBB tax, but we start fiddling it, we may have some lawsuits that we'll be facing. If we are looking for a sales tax increase, it may be better to align that for a 2024 ballot measure rather than 2022, because we are going to be real filled up this year, given that we didn't really put anything on last year for good reason. But I would just suggest in terms of funding sources to get this ball rolling, it would be, I think the best route forward may be to be a part of a green bond that can go to voters next year potentially. So just throwing that out there in terms of feasibility.
Thank you, Director Deasy. I agree with you. I think the secondary property tax through bond initiative makes the most sense to me rather than a sales tax. But other directors' comments, Director Vasquez or Williams or Mayor, any thoughts? Go ahead, Director Williams.
No, I don't have anything to share at this time.
Director Vasquez?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I appreciate the conversation and the discussion. I do want to throw out in there as well that, 2024 ballot, they're probably going to do something around the jail district because it expires in 2026. And so they need to have at least two runs at it if to maintain that jail district tax. So, as far as the options, I can see the value in both, and just as when we're taking that in consideration, just look at the other things that are going to be on the ballot, because I don't want to saturate the voters with too many things, because that's when different projects start losing. So, we want to consolidate and really make sure that if we put something on the ballot, that it's focused and the only thing that we're putting on the ballot. So, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Director Mayor.
Thank you. And so I just want to echo Director Vasquez's comments about fatigue. When you get, a lot of initiatives on the ballot, you start to get a lot of no's. So I do want to, if there's, any potential for alignment with something the city is pursuing or what the county is pursuing or what have you, I think that's the better route in terms of if we're pursuing some sort of ballot initiative.
Director Mayor, follow-up question for you.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts of if NAU would be open to partnering again?
I can't give you a definitive answer right now. I think that people would be open to entertaining that discussion if it was part of the discussion previously. But we're also operating in a somewhat different funding model right now. But I think it's worth a discussion, but I can't make a commitment at this time.
I need a yes. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Heather.
So I wanted to clarify a little bit on the 2018 initiative. So NAU does contribute to Mountain Line Transit. So they contribute just over $500,000 towards operating. Mainly, it's about 50% of what it cost us to operate Route 10, which serves the students on campus and in off-campus housing. And it is in lieu of fares. So they pay that and the students don't pay the fare. So just so everybody's clear on that connection, in 2018, the negotiation was for a U-Pass program, which would allow all students to have free access across the community to all services, and that was connected to the 2018 tax passing. So just want to be sure we are all talking about the same funding sources. there is a trade-off. If we go that route again, the UPass replaces the fares that we receive from the NAU students. And so just keep that in mind as you talk about funding sources. There are some ins and outs to the different sources we're talking about, specifically with NAU.
So it'd be like a net $500,000 increase from NAU.
Well, I believe the negotiation was that we would go from the 500 to 1.5 million. But right now we're collecting fares from students. We wouldn't collect fares from those students in the future. So it would probably be a net increase, absolutely, of between half and 3/4. It's just not 100% net increase.
Okay, that's helpful. And obviously things change, and I get that too. I'm just curious. That was good to know. Good information. I believe there's one more slide if we're ready to move on, directors, unless there's any other comments on this. All right, go for it.
Thank you, Chair Shimoni. Just one final slide here. As I had indicated, we are going to do a major community outreach push. It all starts with our public website that's here set to go live. We're working with Mountain Line to do some final tweaks to it, and hopefully, if not by the end of this week and next week, you will be able to go on to flagstaffinmotion.com, where we're going to ask for input on the goals that you saw. Have some questions about where people want to go. We'll have an interactive map, and you'll see a lot of information about what is Mountain Line, what are the services that are provided, really an educational component. So one thing I do want to mention related to this website is it's certainly a living, breathing website. So by any means, and we're asking our Citizens Advisory Committee as well, if there are things that don't make sense, things we might want to update as this website is live, we're certainly able to do that. It's not intended to just be put out there and be stagnant. And the idea is to have this website active and online through the life of this project. So at least through the end of this calendar year.
Okay, I was about to ask us at the end of this calendar year. Okay, because I was thinking about the student populations being gone for the summer and summer break in general. So I want to make sure that they're going to be engaged in this. Anything we do with print, I would advocate that we integrate QR codes just for simplicity and ease of the user. If we can do anything about language accessibility, that'd be great to translate. And my last comment always is going to be videos. If we can put a video on the landing page or anything, anywhere that we can integrate video communication. It could even just be one person saying, welcome to the Flagstaff in Motion website. On this website, you'll find X, Y, just some sort of tutorial I think is helpful to the community and to just, members of the public. But that's great. That sounds good to me. Any comments, directors? Director Mayer.
Yeah, just to echo the chair's comments around engaging students. Just knowing that the students are sort of, make up a sizable share of transit users. I think it'll be super important to engage those folks in a very meaningful way. Just understanding that ultimately, if they're going to be using the system, they ought to be able to have some significant input in it. So I'd be happy to facilitate any discussions with particularly our Green Jacks and some of our groups that are sort of naturally predisposed to transit use and sustainability and all that.
That's great, thank you. And I also think about the Greek life community on campus and all the other major group, the clubs and whatnot. And yeah, obviously CCC students as well. Any other comments? Very good. Is there any other information you're looking from us on this before we move on to the next agenda item?
No, Mr. Chair. Thank you. This is great.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lozano and your team. Very appreciate the presentation and your efforts in our community. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, we are going to move on. We're running a couple minutes behind schedule, which is totally fine, but we're going to go ahead and skip agenda item 11. We're going to put that onto a future agenda, I believe. We'll come back to that later. Is that correct, Heather? Does that sound good?
Actually, we won't agendize it again unless there's questions. So the information's presented in the staff report. We could have done it as a progress report. So if you have questions you want us to put on a future agenda, we can. Otherwise, we won't bring it back until the next update.
Okay, that sounds good. So directors, do reach out if you want to put that on the future agenda, but I think that was pretty straightforward. That brings us down to a consent agenda, which we can adopt at once, but I want to say, Heather, your comments that you wanted to make was in regards to the progress report, right? Nothing on the consent agenda, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so directors, we're looking at consent agenda 12, 13, and 14. And we can move to approve our entire consent agenda with one motion when we're ready. So is there any comments or questions on the consent agenda? And if not, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion from Director Mayer to approve a consent agenda with a second from Director Vasquez. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That motion carries. Thank you very much. That brings us down to our progress reports. And on our progress reports, Heather, go ahead.
Sure. So I'll be brief. I know we need to get to executive session. You have all the progress reports. If you ever need clarifying information, please let us know. I did want to highlight a couple of things under current events. We are excited about our Welcome Back Rider campaign. We just finished a video shoot last week that involved multiple staff members from various positions welcoming our riders back to safe and reliable transportation. So more to come on that soon. We also received word that the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee has earmarked $1.4 million to Mountain Line for our electrification upgrades necessary to pilot our electric buses in the coming years. We're very excited for the support of Congressman O'Halloran and others on that particular topic. And then I wanted to point out, if you would all join me in congratulating Rhonda on her 10-year anniversary. The actual anniversary was yesterday. Big accomplishment. There are others in the current events, but because Rhonda is here, I did want to recognize her. And then 2 items not in the current events presented in the packet. One, we've talked about the federal mask mandate that's in effect until September 13th. Due to that mandate, we are going to remain in virtual meeting settings for the month of August and potentially in early September because our administrative facility is covered by that mask mandate. So everyone who visits our building for meetings, et cetera, must be masked. And the masking makes participation in these meetings and presentations very difficult. So we'll stay in virtual until we see that mandate lifted. Unless there's objections, then please reach out to me and let me know. And last, wanted to clarify the mobile ticketing progress report that you have says we did a soft launch on June 7th. That actually has been pushed until July, and we should have more information in August on how that is going. So with that, that's my very brief current events. There's lots more in the report in your packet.
Thank you, Heather. Any comments or questions about the progress reports? All right, so now that brings us down to our executive session. I'm looking for a motion to recess or move to go into executive session.
A motion to move into executive session.
Second.
Great. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. That motion carries.
Mr. Chairman and Heather, I'm not needed in the executive session, and the only thing after that really is adjournment. I can stick around if you want, or I think it's appropriate for me to drop off at this point because I'm not involved in that evaluation process. Heather, are you comfortable with that?
That's fine with us, Chair Shimoni, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so someone will be moving us over?
Yes, I think IT is working on moving us into executive session.
All right, here we are. Let's make sure everyone gets back. I think we're all here. Great. Well, directors and staff, thank you so much. Great meeting, covered a lot of ground. With that, we are adjourned. Have a great rest of your day and your weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Chair Shimoni, great job.
Take care, everybody.